Welcome to Scale the Chaos podcast, where we talk all things contributing to your organization's chaos and dysfunction. I'm Rhonda Lea, founder and owner of Scale the Chaos. My guest today is a Gen Z leadership expert helping business leaders manage young people. Please welcome my guest, Dale Wetmore.
Thank you, Rhonda. Glad to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about coaching and some of the strategies or coaching techniques that are best for the Gen Z.
In terms of coaching, here's the point, is it's hands-on personal leadership. And everybody now, but particularly Gen Z, is seen as, quote, disloyal, unquote, also
Okay.
known as quits often without warning.
Mm-hmm.
But really, loyalty is not to companies. Loyalty is to people.
Mm-hmm.
Because the meaningful relationships you create as a leader are
Yes.
with people.
Yes.
So it's all about, it's okay, let's make this about the people. When I was working in Silicon Valley, many startups fail, as
Mm-hmm.
right. So
Yeah.
you can be a hotshot engineer, you'll get hired as a startup, you'll know that you'll work like crazy for 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and then the startup will run out of money, or it's clear they're never really taking off. They're not going to die,
Yeah.
but they're going to take off. You're not going to get rich and you leave. The question in Silicon Valley becomes, okay, if you hire me for this company, who am I going to work for?
Yeah.
Because successful leaders are great coaches. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm quoting Harvard Business Review. They have a article called, I think it's called Successful Leaders Are Great Coaches.
Yeah.
But the point is that the opportunity to learn is now the number one factor, according to the youngest generation, of a great work environment.
And I would agree, even from a different generation, every company, every position I've ever had, I've learned something new for that next position. I think even other generations are discovering that you can't be loyal. That the people who are professing loyalty to the companies are the companies who have no loyalty to the employees, because we've all heard multiple stories of, oh, I was so loyal to this company, but the second XYZ happened, they didn't hesitate to cut me.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to that. And Gen Z is one of those first generations where they haven't necessarily had to wake up to it. That's just normal to them. Does that
No,
make sense? Yeah.
you know it. Yes.
Yeah.
Another important thing, if you want to be a coach instead of a manager,
Mm-hmm.
is to care. Leaders who care have more engaged teams and less turnover. That's the result of a study. And it turns out that this next generation won't invest fully in their jobs until they feel a personal connection with their
Yeah.
manager.
Yeah.
And boy, that's new. I think when I was studying leadership or management in college, sometimes it would be explained that, well, here's what you do as a manager. You give your people goals, and then you
Mm-hmm.
come back in a year and you evaluate them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's very little contact.
Yep.
But today, not only do you have to work with them, but they have to know you personally. You have to at least share some emotion. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be about your personal life, but it has
Yeah.
to be about your personal feelings about work. And until they feel that connection, they report that I'm not connected because my leader isn't connected.
Yeah. And often that connection comes from that mentoring, that training. In the work environments that I have worked in, that training and mentoring hasn't been a huge
Yeah, yeah,
focus or strategy or goal,
yeah.
which is mind-boggling to me because number one, how are your employees supposed to effectively serve your customers or meet your customers' needs if they don't know what they're doing? Like that to me is just crazy. But I think we've all heard, I don't want to spend all this time investing in my employees for them to leave to go somewhere else. And there's a quote, and I don't remember who said it, but I love it. And basically, in essence, it says, training your employees enough to go somewhere else isn't the worst thing you could do. The worst thing you could do is not train them and they stay. Right. And I totally butchered the quote. But yeah, and I think it's not just their generation either. I think all of us can relate to being frustrated in a role or a position where we're expected to do something. And it goes back to that communication. We're expected to do something. We're not completely sure what it is that we're supposed to do. And we certainly don't really know how we're supposed to do it. we're supposed to just figure it out. Then that contributes to inconsistency. And now you can get into my realm, the processes and the inconsistencies and the deviations and the ineffectiveness and everything. So that training and that mentoring is so crucial just for the success of your business, let alone for the success of the Generation Z workers.
And you make a good distinction here, Rhonda, that I'd like to underscore. Training, when you talk about having a class or something like that, I've struggled with that as a leader because it's really tricky to put together a class, and a lot of this is ad hoc. Mentoring's different though.
Mm-hmm.
Mentoring, in my mind, this is something where like you'll meet with a mentor once a month,
Mm-hmm.
which is useful, or you can have a mentor the same age as you where you talk to them more often.
Mm-hmm.
But the most powerful thing here is the coaching element where you're having frequent, purposeful
Mm-hmm.
interaction with your employee. And
Yes.
because it's frequent and purposeful, they can ask you in real time, what am I supposed to do? And
Yeah. And how do I do it?
and how do I do it? And here's my prescription.
Uh-huh.
In case you're wondering, well, as a manager, I don't have time to spend so much time with my people. A Gallup poll showed that the most favored and most useful communication with subordinates is 15 minutes a week, just 15 minutes a week. And in fact, is more useful than 45 minutes a week.
Yeah.
So what the deal is, as long as it's meaningful,
Mm-hmm.
that 15 minutes a week develops people better than any other leadership activity, shows the highest performance and the lowest turnover. Again, you're not training them so they can leave. You are
Mm-hmm.
creating an emotional connection with them as their coach so that they will be loyal, because loyalty is to people.
Yes, that can be the best 15 minutes you spend of the week. Now, if you have a large team, that can add up to several hours possibly. But the other thing that I find as I work with organizations is that managers are still do often, and this is another subject, but I just want to highlight it here. So many managers are still performing many of the day-to-day operations that the
Mhm.
team is supposed to be doing. So they're not able to effectively manage the people. Managing the people is completely different than performing the processes, right? And so I want to make sure that we make that perfectly clear. But your point about these 15 minutes and creating loyalty, that goes to your third, your culture. You're creating the culture. That's part of that culture, right?
Yeah, so let me just wrap up for the weekly discussion
Okay.
because it's not easy. My sympathy goes out 100% to the leaders out there who frankly don't have time to eat lunch, let alone
Yeah.
15 minutes per person. However, the ideal is if you're doing too much of their work
Yep.
and you start to coach them more, they can do the work for you. And
Yes.
I know we're asking you as a leader to actually spend more time at work, but the idea is that it will pay off. It will pay off because your people will do the work that you've been doing. Your people will be more likely to stay. Your people will be more effective. Your people will not be leaving, so you don't have to retrain them.
Yes.
I would say, as a process, make it mandatory.
Mm-hmm. Build it
Everyone
into your processes.
has to do 15 minutes a week with a manager. You can't, you can blow it off in terms of, oh, I'm too busy Tuesday, but you got to do it.
Yeah.
Both have to do it. And I had a leader once say, 15 minutes, I talk to my people all the time, more than that. When I talk to his people, they're like, oh, yeah, he calls us and asks for an update on some issue.
Yeah.
And then he hangs up, and I'm not having a meaningful conversation.
Yeah.
What do I need to learn? So, some examples of weekly discussion topics that are the most powerful are things like, what are you working on?
Mm-hmm.
For me, as a subordinate, I was off in the weeds working on the wrong stuff.
Yeah.
What are you working on? Number two, who are you collaborating with?
Uh-huh.
Collaboration leads to more learning. It also leads to a sense of fellowship and a sense of community, which is part of a culture when that's all goodness. And also, oh, I'm not collaborating with anyone, which is a common thing.
Uh-huh.
Well, the manager knows more, and the
Uh-huh.
manager can say, it just so happens that Enrique over on the other team's doing the same thing you are. Why don't you collaborate?
Yeah.
A third question, can I help you prioritize your goals?
Yes.
That was one I loved because I usually had about 12 goals and my manager would say, no, 2 goals this week.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then the last one, are you empowered to succeed? Another way to say that is, do you have everything you need
Yeah.
to succeed? I just gave you 2 goals. Do you have everything you need?
To do those. Yeah.
We have those kind of conversations. There's way too, and I would work with technical people, so they'd
Mm-hmm.
be like, they're not very verbal anyway. And it's like, I don't have anything to talk about this week. And I'm like, boom, here are my
Yeah.
questions. They're going to be the same questions every week
Yep.
coming.
Yeah. Be
I'm not
prepared.
going to hear any of this about you don't have anything to talk about.
Yeah. And I like that. I like that it's structured. And that because this is one of the things that I speak to is just structuring almost everything because it adds to consistency. And obviously, there's always going to be those one offs, or hopefully occasionally those one offs where maybe you need to deviate a little bit. But for the most part, like you said, they know what questions are going to be asked each week. They know, or at least they should know, that they should come prepared. And if they don't come prepared, then that's one of the things that you talk to them about, right? And mentor them on is coming prepared to your weekly 15-minute huddle or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, giving it some structure because the last thing you want to do is meet for them and say, okay, we're in for our 15-minute. What do you want to talk about? That's just a total waste of time. And oftentimes it ends up becoming longer than 15 minutes because then you're just having a water cooler discussion about what you did over the weekend or what you're going to do this coming weekend, right?
Mhm.
So
Yes,
yeah,
that's the point of when you know you've only got 15 minutes, a lot of the jibber jabber goes away. I've had leaders report it used to be an hour, and now that it's 15 minutes, they don't come and talk a lot about I have this problem, I have that
yeah,
problem. They're like, I only have 15 minutes, so I've
yeah,
actually thought about it, and I have two potential.
yeah,
Which do you think is best?
yeah.
Yeah,
And it helps them become more concise as well.
helps their thought process. Yes.
Let's talk about some tips that you have for creating that culture that works for everybody, all generations.
The first thing is in a team meeting or individually, you tell them, I want to create a culture that works for everybody. So I'm here to listen. I
Hmm.
want you to be here to listen too. I think we're both going to be bending a little. So that's the spirit you bring to it. One of the things that creates a wonderful culture is always be talking or always keep them in mind about their future with your company.
Yes.
There's a saying, they will leave if they don't believe.
Hmm.
If they don't believe they have a future with your company, they'll leave. So treat it, maybe you're coaching someone through a marathon. So it's okay, you're in the 3rd mile, here's probably what you're experiencing. Later, you'll be in the 12th mile, and these will be the challenges. So it's
Hmm.
that kind of thing. Here's what you're doing now in your career. If you do well, your next step will be doing X, Y, Z. And by the
Yeah.
way, you're going to be making X amount more, or you're going to have X more responsibility,
Yes.
right? And you just lay it out for them all the way to whatever it is they want to achieve, but show them, develop them their career. Because with all the economic uncertainty, studies show that career stability is a
Hmm.
higher priority than pay. But if you can say, look, we invest in our people,
Uh-huh.
we spend 15 minutes a week with people. We also develop careers, and you're going to know where your career is and what experiences you need, et cetera, et cetera. One of the great things you can do for Gen Z is to create a place to belong. COVID affected them, right? We were all
Hmm.
separate from each other. People were working from home. And as I shared, this generation is the loneliest of all of them.
Yeah.
Part of it is because maybe they haven't settled down with a life partner or a family, et cetera. But they're the least likely to want a fully remote schedule. Gen Z is the most likely to want to have at least some chance to come in the office. So,
That's interesting
isn't it
because we're seeing this shift back to the office and I'm seeing a lot of pushback, but you're saying it's not coming from that Gen Z.
I guess you can interpolate that. I try to be really strict about what the study says. So this
Okay.
Business Insider report
Uh-huh.
that, yeah, they're the least likely to want a
Interesting.
fully remote schedule because they have the least social interaction.
Yeah, and hopefully my children don't hate that I talk about them. But my daughter was in college during COVID. She was doing all the classes from home online, and she really struggled. She's not an extrovert by any means, but she still needed that social interaction. It was just so isolating. It really was difficult. COVID was extremely, it was difficult on all of us, but especially on the younger generation that was just emerging and becoming adults. And then bam, they had to isolate.
And let's remember, the young folks are learning the ropes.
Yeah.
If you're 45 and been doing the same job for 15 years, you don't need to have a lot of interaction necessarily if you know what to do. But when you're learning, it's so good to be with other people because there's so much you won't get on the Slack channel.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I think of when I was 23 years old and joined IBM, even though I had a master's in computer science, there's so much I didn't know about IBM computers. And we were in the office by 8 a.m. every morning,
Hmm.
rain or shine, right?
Hmm.
And it was so helpful to have these really old 35-year-olds who had more than a decade of experience. And I'd come up to them and go, we've got this problem with this customer, and what should I do?
Yeah.
And again, there's like, you wouldn't dare bother them by calling them. But when you're standing together by the copy machine, it's really easy to
Yeah.
ask a question. So yeah, that's one
Yeah.
of
Absolutely.
why
Oh,
they want to come in. Now, I do say you should really optimize hybrid work. So ideally, most everybody wants to have a chance to work from home.
yeah.
Um, make it supportive check-ins and not surveillance as a leader, right?
Uh-huh.
And try not to focus on hours worked, focus on outcomes if you. The last thing in terms of you want to create a good culture, it starts from the beginning when
Yes.
they join the company, make them feel welcome. So some ways to make them feel welcome, again, coming from a study, pair them with a peer. Oh yeah, I joined 3 months ago. If possible, super helpful. Assign a senior mentor. So not the leader, but somebody else who
Uh-huh.
it's once a month. You can ask questions. After 90 days, have a feedback session, a detailed feedback session, because if they're getting off on the wrong foot, they're not doing well, or perhaps they are doing well, but they don't like it, you can
Yeah.
catch those problems after 90 days.
Yeah.
And then frankly, lastly, explain the cultural basics. For
Mhm.
example, baby boomers on time. If you're on time for 9 o'clock meeting, that means you're probably there a few minutes early so that when
Yeah.
the meeting starts at 9 o'clock, you're ready. Gen Z thinks that 10 minutes late is still on time. Create a culture together that
Yeah.
works for you. It's either 10 minutes late or it's on time or it's 2 minutes early. Figure it
Yeah.
out yourself, but make that explicit and then hold to it.
And make sure that you are not overworking them to where it's hard for them to be on time to these meetings, right? I've worked in a lot of cultures where it's just meeting after meeting. And if the previous meeting goes over, then you're late to the next one. I've definitely worked in some cultures where that was completely acceptable because people were so overworked. What's the one thing you wish every leader understood about Gen Z employees? If you could just say one thing that you just wish everybody could understand.
I would say that they are gifted, specifically different because they are more flexible than earlier generations. They're more entrepreneurial, they're
Uh-huh.
more collaborative, and your leadership should be focused on trying to pull that out of them, right? In terms of technology, they're what McKinsey
Mhm.
called hypercognitive, which means they can pull data from a lot of different places and put it together into something cogent very quickly. They're also more adaptable and more optimistic, particularly when they're mentored. And
Mhm.
this generation is the best at AI. In fact, some of them are even mentoring their own CEOs. So
Yeah.
if I could say one thing leaders need to know about the next gen, they're gifted, man. So be a good leader so you can leverage those gifts.
Yeah, when you mentioned they're mentoring their CEOs on AI, it reminds me of you see those scenes where the teenagers or their younger people are helping their grandparents work the remote, right? It's same thing in some ways.
It's nothing to be ashamed of. I was
Yeah.
certain after getting a master's in computer science and then working my entire career in technology that I wouldn't have that. My kids know more than me.
Oh, absolutely. For sure. Yeah. Like I said, I wasn't aware that punctuation was no longer applicable. Silly me, right? Okay, so for our listeners looking to better engage their Gen Z workforce, what's one actionable step they can take today to help engagement with their Gen Z workforce?
When we talk about communicate, coach, culture,
Uh-huh.
communicate's the most important. And I talk about being explicit. I talk about 15 minutes a week. So if I was going to change just one thing, I'd say we must meet 15 minutes a week. Here's what we're going to talk about.
And here's what we're going to talk about every week. Yeah. Come prepared. You explicitly need to say, come prepared to talk about these, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun, Dale. This is, like I said, this is a super important topic. We need to be discussing it. So, listeners, make sure you check out Dale's website at www.giftofnextgen.com and follow him on his LinkedIn. Link to his LinkedIn can be found below in the podcast description, as well as on his website. And also be sure to watch out for his upcoming book called Leading Gen Z, The Gift of the Next Generation. And when is that book due out, Dale?
First quarter next year, first quarter 2025.
First quarter next year. And I'm sure if they follow you on LinkedIn or go to your website, that they'll be updated when that comes out. Correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So for more information on how you can scale the chaos in your organization, you can head on over to my website, www.scalethechaos.com. You can also find our podcast on scalethechaos.com/podcast. I'm Rhonda Lea, and we will chat more next time. Thank you.